What's happening, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Orange Weekly, presented by Crouse Health. My name is Brent Axe. We're live here on, we got a number of channels open today. We got the Syracuse Orange Basketball Facebook page open. We got the Syracuse Lacrosse Facebook page open because we got a lot of lacrosse to get into on the program today. We got Twitter open. We got our Syracuse Orange Sports on YouTube page open. And you are welcome, as always, to join the conversation here. Your questions, your comments on all things SU sports. We'll certainly get more into that brutal loss Syracuse had to Clemson last night. A lot of great comments on that on our post-game show last night. But if you didn't get a chance to come by there or just want to share some things today, we will react to your comments and questions throughout the show. Are we seeing the death of the zone defense before our very eyes? Plus Pitt. Yeah, they're going to remember what Jim Boeheim said a couple of weeks ago as they head to the Oakland Zoo, one of the tough environments in all of college basketball, really, but certainly in the ACC on Saturday. It's been really encouraging to see some flair back in the Syracuse lacrosse realm. If you are fans of the movie Office Space, I'm sure you'll enjoy that flair reference there. Got to have 37 pieces of flair, right? But it's been great to see Syracuse playing with some flair again. And that's on the men's side of things. Not that the women's side does not play with the excitement and the speed and the goal scoring and all things considered as well. They certainly do. But the difference between the men's and the women's team, at least so far, and it's early here, friends, but the Syracuse women's lacrosse team looks like a true blue, legit national championship contender. We had a national championship already with soccer in the fall. Could we have another one coming in the spring among the things we will be discussing today? But really, it's open forum. It's open forum. You guys can drop in, talk about whatever you want to on the SU sports front, and we will react to it. We'll start with Michael Antonio, who says, it's not the zone, it's the players. Yeah, it's kind of a chicken or the egg kind of thing, right? If you don't have the right players, then you can't play the zone, right? And I just don't think Syracuse has the right players to play an effective game-by-game zone. You know, you've got Clemson, who became, I want to count it up here. Give me a second to go back and look at this here. But I believe one mark of the zone, of course, is how many threes you hit against it, because the temptation is to take threes because you're going to get open threes if Syracuse is not closing down on you. Yeah, Clemson, here it is right here, was the 14th opponent to hit 10 or more three-pointers against the Orange this season. So, look, the zone can still be an effective weapon, particularly if you're not used to it. But ACC programs, and Clemson's a team Syracuse only plays once a year typically, they knew exactly what to do against the zone last night. So they're hitting their threes, they're drawing out the defense, and once that happened, they're piping it inside to P.J. Hall and to other players who were taking advantage of a spread-out Syracuse defense last night. So I just think that the zone is not the weapon it used to be. It's certainly not the mind game it used to be, particularly in the ACC. Teams have seen it a bunch of times now. Every team's got a bunch of three-point shooters on it now, right? You've even got big men that can hit threes. You've got stretch fours that can hit threes. Obviously, you know, Clemson had a couple of guards that already could hit threes. And about Hunter Tyson out there last night hitting 6 3-pointers like it's nothing, right? So I don't want to say you completely scrap the zone defense, but I feel like we're at the point where you've got to seriously consider not making it your exclusive defense. And I got to tell you, I have been a staunch defender of the zone defense over the years. I have really enjoyed the advantage it's given Syracuse, the uniqueness of it. You see these teams in the NCAA tournament, particularly in the quick turnaround. And that's something that Jim Boeheim has just leaned on for years, right? That second game, right? 2 and 3 days, it's hard to prepare for, right? Even the week leading up to it, if you're a team first round NCAA tournament, you haven't seen a zone defense all year, that has given Syracuse a strategic advantage through the years. That's obviously not a strategic advantage when you can't even make the NCAA tournament, which we're heading for the second straight year. That's going to be the case. Syracuse might be left out of the postseason altogether, as Chris Carlson wrote about on syracuse.com this week. And I would encourage you guys to read that piece, that if Syracuse doesn't make the NIT, and frankly, who cares if they don't, but if they don't, it's the first time since the late 1960s that they would be out of the postseason altogether in back-to-back years, as of course they didn't make any postseason last year with a losing record as well. So look, the zone is still something that draws in players. If you get those long guys, Syracuse just added William Patterson to the class of 2023 this year. It can still be used effectively. It just can't be used exclusively at this point. So I think we're seeing that. Just some more final thoughts on that Clemson game last night. We certainly covered it extensively in post game. You guys can check that out on our YouTube page and in my recap on syracuse.com on our social media channels if you missed the show last night. But look, that was just a straightforward no-show by that team last night. Clemson drops in 14 3-pointers. They had 28 assists in that game, moving the ball with precision, with pop. Syracuse just could not answer in any way, shape, or form. And what has happened in the last two games is Duke and Clemson has just flat out put a blueprint in place of how to beat Syracuse. And that there's a number of ways you could beat Syracuse, but particularly you just got to bully Jesse Edwards. Now, not every team in the league has the personnel to do that. Duke had a few 7-footers. Clemson had PJ Hall, but most teams have big enough players that they can at very least. I like how Brad Brownell put this last night for Clemson. When Jesse gets the ball, we're going to be in his lap, right? Duke double teamed Jesse every single time he touched the basketball. There were even times he was triple teamed out there. Clemson didn't do that. Brownell put it this way last night. He said, we went 1.5, right? PJ Hall was the primary defender who was kind of shoving him out of his comfort zone. The first shot that Jesse took in that game last night was with like 4:20 to go in the first half, and it was an 18-footer right beyond the free throw line. It's not where you want Jesse Edwards taking his shots, right? So if you bully him, if you're physical with him, if you push him out, it really affects the Syracuse offense because they're getting nothing from their forward position right now. Chris Bell's like 4 of his last 25 from three-point range. He's not a reliable scorer or rebounder as it is. Benny Williams ended up with 9 points, but a lot of that came in garbage time late in the game. Justin Taylor and Copeland combined for 4 points last night. Nobody at that forward position is reliable with the exception of Malik Brown. And even Brown only had 5 points and 2 rebounds last night. Brown's a limited offensive player. He's great around the basket, but you can't get too far away from the basket. He's a terrific rebounder, not last night, but he certainly has been this year, and is a great defender. But that forward position, I wrote it in my column today on syracuse.com. If the forward position fell in a forest, would it make a sound at this point? So it puts a lot of pressure on Joe Girard, Judah Mintz, and Jesse Edwards to be your primary scorers. So what teams are doing, what you've seen Duke and Clemson do these last 2 games, is, okay, well, we're just going to take Jesse out of the game. And Joe and Judah can do their thing, and we're just going to score more than you, and we're going to value possessions and to move the ball around and just do the thing. And Clemson put on a clinic last night. Duke just overwhelmed Syracuse in the paint. So it's not looking good here. Syracuse is kind of collapsing down the stretch. And folks, they go to Pittsburgh on Saturday. And I was talking to my friend Tim Benz today. So Tim is a terrific writer and broadcaster in the Pittsburgh area. He's a Syracuse alum, as a matter of fact. And Tim reminded me, I was on his podcast today, and he reminded me of something that, of course, is going to come full scale here, in that Jim Boeheim made those comments a couple of weeks ago about Pitt, about Wake Forest, and about Miami. Now, frankly, he was right about Miami because they do buy players. But Pitt fans have not forgotten that. The Oakland Zoo is going to be bonkers this weekend. Remember, Pittsburgh is back. They're good. They're on the brink of pretty much feeling safe about going to the NCAA tournament. I'd be very surprised if that was not a tournament team at this point. Virginia's a lock. Miami's a lock. I think Duke is in. I think Pitt is in as well. Their fans are back. And that environment is going to be crazy. And they are going to be on Boeheim the whole game. Now, Boeheim doesn't play, right? But that is going to be a tough environment for that team to go into. And they have not been good against teams above them in the standings. You just draw a direct line in where Syracuse is. They're now 9-8 in the league. Every team above them, with the exception of NC State, they've lost to. Every team below them, they have beaten, right? Pitt is near the top of the league. They're going to be a problem in that they're one of the better offensive teams. Blake Hinson is one of the better players in the league, another forward that can score. Syracuse has seen a couple of these guys in recent games that have given them big trouble. It was Hunter Tyson last night. You got Blake Hinson in this game for Pitt. Filipowski is technically a center for Duke, but he kind of plays more like a stretch four. The Colgate transfer, Nelly Cummings, who had a nice game in the first matchup against Syracuse. He dropped 22 the other night. He's scoring about 11 points per game. You got 4 players averaging over 10 points per game. Hinson, Burton, Cummings, Greg Elliott, a couple of great guards that Pitt can throw in there. Federico is a player that I think can challenge Jesse Edwards in the paint, and they're one of the best offensive teams in the ACC, and those teams are giving Syracuse a lot of trouble because that zone defense, as we talked about a few minutes ago, is ineffective. It's just not what it used to be. It's not stopping anybody. People are not intimidated by it. They're shooting over it. They're passing around it. It's just not a good defense. And I'll tell you what, I went back and I looked at what I wrote about after that first Pittsburgh game. Remember, the first Pitt game earlier this year, Syracuse was down 20. They came back. They actually made it a game. They only lost by 2 to Pitt. But I said, let's go back and look at that first Pitt game because it was in December. It was early in the schedule. And what has really changed from what I said and what I wrote? So this was back on December 20th when they played Pitt. The headline of my recap was the best and worst of Syracuse basketball were on display in loss to Pitt, right? So I went back and I looked at some things here. This was the best of Syracuse that night. Syracuse fought tooth and nail to stage a furious second half comeback. It is a fearless freshman point guard in Judah Mintz willing to do anything to win, a major lift off the bench from forwards willing to put in effort, and senior guard Joe Girard channeling his best Josh Allen, who was there at that game that night, with clutch plays late after being bottled up early in the game, okay? What's still true there? Judah Mintz. That's it. Girard was held in check last night. I think he can score against Pitt, but he's going to have a difficult time, and particularly if Pitt does the same thing that Clemson and Duke did, take Jesse out, put more pressure on him and Judah to score. The forwards, they're lost right now, as we talked about a minute ago. So this was the worst, to go back to what I wrote. Syracuse got off to another slow start, can't shoot threes, got a lackluster rebounding effort from its 2 starting forwards, had the base 2-3 zone defense exposed again, and saw star center Jesse Edwards fall back into a trap. So that's all still true. Jesse's having a lot of trouble with opposing defenses right now. In that game, the first Pitt game, he got into foul trouble. So he can't do that again, particularly with Lively in the paint, as we mentioned. This team still can't shoot threes consistently. They get off to slow starts. It happened again last night against Clemson, who was up 13-3 right away and never looked back. So it's incredible when you go back. That game was 2 months ago. They're going to get Pitt a full 2 months after what we saw at the beginning of ACC play, and not much has advanced. Not much has improved, with the exception of Judah Mintz. I think this team is better in some ways, but a lot of those things that I wrote about this team 2 months ago are exactly the same now, right? So we mentioned the environment, how good Pitt's playing right now. I mean, it's going to take a full-scale effort here for this team. The only good team that Syracuse has beaten this year is NC State in league play, and that was when all 5 starters were in double figures. It's going to take that kind of game to beat Pitt. You got to get something out of your forwards. You got to shoot threes beyond what Joe Girard brings in. He didn't even bring you that much in that department last night. You know who did? Judah Mintz, which is good news and it's bad news. It's good news because Syracuse needs another 3-point shooter. It's bad news because it's only going to accelerate the fear that Judah might be a one-and-done player, because the one flaw in his game that would hold back any NBA teams from picking him in the first round is his 3-point shot. He's got to get bigger too, but that's something you can work on in the pros easily. But he's got to get a better 3-point shot. And if that's coming around here in these last few games and he can show it off in the ACC tournament a little bit, that'll give him less motivation and less incentive to return for another season at Syracuse, right? So, temper down on the threes there, Judah, right? Because, you want to see him want to come back to college basketball for another year and work on that. I'm only half joking when I say that, by the way. And a number of people have reached out to me and said that today, like, oh boy, like if his 3-point shot's coming around, maybe NBA teams will give him a second look there. But if I had to predict, I think he'll be back next season. But we'll see if this team kind of falls apart down the stretch here and doesn't go to the postseason. That'll give them motivation for next season, certainly. But look, does Joe Girard come back for another year? Does Jesse Edwards come back for another year? Who is entering the portal? I don't want to speculate here, but I would imagine Benny Williams is going to think hard about that. There's always a player or two you don't anticipate that goes into the portal. Who do you get out of the portal will be a question. I felt like a player like J.J. Starling goes in the portal. Notre Dame loses Mike Bray. Maybe he thinks about coming home. That would be a huge get for Syracuse. You always have to look in the portal anyway. The recruiting class is light right now. They have Patterson. They might get Marcus Adams. A commitment from him. He's a terrific forward who would have to reclassify to the class of 2023 anyway. But the thoughts of next year are already here. People are looking over the horizon. They got one eye on next year while watching these last three games and whatever happens in the ACC tournament. So a lot happening on the basketball front. You guys can jump in with some more comments about that. Wanted to give some love to lacrosse, though, today. Let's start with the women's team. Syracuse women's lacrosse team is a true blue, legit national championship contender. And I know that after 3 games. Here's why I know that. They have depth. They can go up and down that lineup. They have a ton of primary scorers. Megan Tyrell has lived up to the hype so far as the preseason player of the year. She had 11 points against Maryland, 6 goals, 5 assists. Maryland's one of the best teams in the country. She is fantastic. And the fact she came back for another year is huge. Megan Carney has been basically scoring 4 goals a game. She is fantastic, right? Emma Ward's back. Emma Tyrell, Megan's sister, is back. Syracuse has a true blue. I keep saying true blue. I don't know why I keep coming back to that. Syracuse has a terrific draw control specialist in Caitlin Mashevsky. The thing that's brought it all together, though, because they have depth, they have a great coach in Kayla Trainer. They've got to stay healthy going down the stretch here. But what I've seen so far, and has got to maintain, it's great goaltending. Syracuse struggled in the net last year. They went back and forth between Delaney Schweitzer and Kimber Hauer, who was a transfer into Syracuse. Delaney Schweitzer has been fantastic this year. She's the ACC Defensive Player of the Week, and that's what you need. You need depth, you need health, you need goaltending, right? Now, Syracuse has a tough schedule coming up. They play all the best teams in the country. They've already beaten Northwestern and Maryland. They're going to play a bunch of ranked teams. The ACC is one of the best leagues in the country. North Carolina's not till the end of the year. Boston College is not till the end of the year. Those are 2 really good teams that Syracuse will face down the road. And that's really the only thing that is going to get in their way. There's a lot of great teams in women's college lacrosse. As Michael Antonio brings up here, hasn't the women's team been a top lax program for a few years now? There's no question about it. What they have not done is win the national championship for a myriad of reasons. They got to the game a couple years ago and lost to a really good Boston College team. Health has held them back in a couple of different instances, namely last year. So they're looking to take that next step. And I think they have the elements to do that this year. Not that they didn't in past years, but the goaltending being better, the depth that this team has, the star power it has, a terrific midfield, great draw control. Like, this could be the team that finally gets over the hump. Go back to a couple more of your comments here. How many teams in the NCAA play zone all game? Doug, I don't know the exact answer to that, but it's not a lot. It's not a ton. If you're talking about the entire Division I realm, it's got to be less than 20 that play zone all the time. Maybe even less than that. I may be underestimating it at this point, but it's not a long list. Kelly just says, we all know what it is. It's Jim Boeheim stepping aside, which that conversation has certainly picked up from a number of people in not only in recent weeks, in recent years, but particularly with this team struggling once again this year. While we're on the lacrosse front here, you guys can keep jumping in with your comments about anything here, but let's look on the men's side. The Flair is back. I don't know if you guys saw this goal that Joey Spallina scored this week against Maryland. Now, Syracuse lost that game. They got dominated at the face-off X. Maryland's got one of the best face-off guys in the country, so I was not surprised to see that. Maryland put a ton of shots on goal. Will Mark was terrific in net. Both the men's and the women's teams have very good goalies this year, which can only help. It's a young defense at Syracuse that's coming up, but when you got a goalie making those kind of saves, it makes up for a lot of the flaws that a young and up and coming defense has for Syracuse right now. But man, Spallina's goal against Maryland, I can't even describe it. I'll try as best we can. Go look it up on social media, wherever. It's not hard to find, trust me. He comes up on the pipe, right? And he's got a defender on him. And instead of spinning to get a front angle on the shot so he can literally look at the goal and score, he just fires it behind him like this. The goalie wasn't anticipating it. The defender wasn't anticipating it. You got to have some cojones to take that shot, because if you miss it, you're going to hear it from your coach, right? Gary Gait encourages that creativity, encourages these guys to play like that, but he made it. And to have that kind of shot in his arsenal is incredible. He's brought some flair back. Finn Thompson's a very creative, very exciting player to watch at attack. Alex Simmons, same thing, a transfer in from Denver. So you got three terrific attackmen. Add in Owen Hiltz to that mix, who kind of inverts a little bit so they can get all four of those guys on the field at the same time. Jackson Burtwhistle at midfield. Syracuse still has some depth issues at midfield they've got to work through, but this team's scoring goals. They've got a great goalie. They've got an improving defense. They got dominated at the faceoff X, but only lost by 3 to Maryland, who's the defending national champion and one of the better teams in the country on the men's side. If anything, this team is they're certainly going to be better than last year when they only won 4 games, right? So they're going to lap that soon. And they might, I don't know if they can make the tournament, because they got some tough games upcoming here, and they still are really, really young. There's a bunch of new players, 22 new players on this team that just have to come together. But a lot of those issues that we saw with this team last year have already faded and are better. And you can see the improvement. It's tangible improvement. They're just young guys that kind of have to get used to chemistry and just kind of get on the same page going forward here. But at the very least, they're an exciting team. Now, they get North Carolina at the Dome on Saturday. The women's team heads to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is a team they should definitely beat. Pitt's relatively new to the ACC. They've got some talented players. Their goalie used to play at Syracuse, so she'll be familiar with some of the personnel. That'll give Pitt a little bit of an advantage. But that's a team they should absolutely beat. The men get North Carolina on Saturday. North Carolina is an interesting team. As Linda notes here, Syracuse men's team lost at the faceoff, but also ground balls. Thanks for giving lacrosse some love. Not enough coverage of lacrosse compared to the other sports. Linda loves some lacrosse, played lacrosse, covering the sport. I'll be there Saturday covering the Syracuse, North Carolina game that we're talking about here, and glad to do it, because lacrosse fans deserve the coverage, and I know how passionate they are about their sport. Now, North Carolina has a great goalie. They've had a terrific defense so far. They're coming off an 8-5 loss to Ohio State, who's a top 10 team. So you can see the kind of grinder that was. They're a little weak at midfield. Their attack is they've got 2 transfers that they brought in and a senior coming back from last year. They're all experienced guys. So that's going to be a challenge for that young defense that we brought up. Absolutely a game Syracuse can win, though. They have to be, Linda, you brought it up, they have to be better on faceoffs and ground balls. Carolina's got a good faceoff guy, top 20 in the country. So Johnny Rachuza, Syracuse's new faceoff guy, has got to be better in this game, recover from what happened last game against Maryland. And you have to be, I'm trying to think of the best way to put this. You can't throw away possessions against a good goalie and a good defense. I think Syracuse has gotten better at shot selection. You have to be aggressive offensively. You don't want them to back off in that sense, but you also don't want to just throw away shots and give possessions over to North Carolina. It's at the Dome, which I think gives Syracuse a little bit of an advantage here. And you just got to beat a great goalie, which can be the hardest thing to do in lacrosse. It can be the hardest thing to do in hockey, too, when you got a hot goalie standing on his head. Sometimes there's not much you can do. So good possessions, bring some of that flair and that creativity back, ground balls, take advantage of the stops Will Mark's going to make on the other side for Syracuse. And this would be big. It'd be a ranked win for the Orange. They started 3-0, beat, 3 teams, frankly, they should have beat. Played a ranked team in Maryland on the road, and, I came away impressed from that game, despite what we're talking about here, a few flaws they're working on. You get Carolina twice. So Syracuse plays Carolina and Duke twice this year. The second time they play Carolina, interestingly enough, later in the season, it's going to be in Maryland in a neutral site game. I don't know why they ended up doing that. I'll have to ask Gary Gate about that at some point. But it's a team you see twice. It's the start of league play. Be a huge league win to put in your back pocket early in the season. Should be a good game at the Dome. That's a 3:00 face-off on Saturday at the Dome. Syracuse basketball will play Pitt at 5:00 on Saturday afternoon. So programming note, we will not have our usual basketball post-game show after the Pittsburgh game on Saturday because I'll be covering Lacrosse, just so you guys know. And while we're on the subject of basketball and tournaments in Pittsburgh, the Syracuse women's basketball team plays Pitt tonight, as it's Thursday as we speak here live. They should beat Pitt. Pitt's the worst team in the ACC. As we speak, Charlie Cream, who is ESPN's bracketologist, has the Syracuse women's basketball team in the NCAA tournament. So there, it would appear, knock on wood, would be some March Madness in our future for Syracuse basketball, just not the team we usually talk about in that realm, right? So we'll track that. They got to beat Pitt. They get the weekend off. Then they got the ACC tournament next week. It looks like they're going to play NC State there. So stay tuned, folks. I think on Orange Weekly next week, we're going to be talking about an NCAA tournament bound Syracuse women's basketball team. So we'll get more into that as we get closer and we know a little bit more about their status, but it's looking good right now. So that'll be exciting to talk about that as well. I think that's what we'll wrap up for today's edition of Orange Weekly. Thanks for your great comments and questions. As always, friends, we do this Thursdays at noon, streaming live. If you want to join the conversation, we can always watch the replay anytime, archived on our social media channels where this streams. And we do put a post up on syracuse.com as well, so you can catch up on the show. Thanks for all your great questions and comments. As mentioned, thanks for reading all of our coverage on syracuse.com, watching the show. And you guys have a great rest of your week, okay? Remember, no post-game show after the Pittsburgh game on Saturday. Should be back next week for Georgia Tech and Wake Forest. And look for all our great coverage on all these sports we talked about and more on syracuse.com. Enjoy the rest of your week, everybody. Thanks for watching Orange Weekly, presented by Crouse Health. We'll talk to you next time.